All right, what is up, guys? My name is Ferrati. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, I typically in the past have done videos on like FPV drone racing, some RC rock crawling, and RC car racing, and now I'm doing a vlog on drifting. I don't typically set out to make YouTube videos just to make YouTube videos. I really only do it if I'm trying to share, like a product I'm excited about, or if I'm trying to share something informational. And so in this video, what I'm mainly going to be focusing on is RC gyros for RC drifting. I've only been drifting for about 2 months. I started in like November. And I've learned a ton in that 2 months, and I know people are gonna scoff like, oh, he's been drifting for 2 months. But I tend to get like really in depth with my hobbies. And because I really want like a deep understanding of like what's going on, when I'm building something or when I'm driving something. And something I've noticed in the community on like Facebook or Reddit is that there's like a lot of like black magic or like voodoo around RC gyros. So there's some things that I've learned that I kind of want to clear up, for anyone watching this video about drift gyros. And so for starters, the most common notion out there is that you have to like spend a lot of money, like $100 to get a gyro that works well for drifting. And that's just completely inaccurate. I started out by saying that I used to make a lot of videos about FPV drone racing. I used to do that professionally. And I worked for a company that designed racing drones. So, I was like working side by side with like electrical engineers and mechanical engineers. I did like all of the test flying and, coordinated all of the racing. And so I've got a lot of experience with using gyros because that's very integral to FPV drones. So to start off talking about the cost of a gyro, there's no reason you need to spend crazy amounts of money for a drift gyro, because these things, they probably cost like $10 to manufacture. Because when you look at a gyro, it's literally just a gyro on a PCB with a processor and some software built into it. So they're super cheap to make. Because we have the same thing on our drone flight controllers, but they're much more like complicated and sophisticated because they do a lot more than an RC car with a drone. And most flight controllers cost way less than drift gyros. So, don't associate cost with like quality or performance is my point. When I was thinking about getting into drifting, it's because my buddy Jess, he got into drifting like over the summer while like I was still crawling. And if you guys are, familiar with my channel, Jess is like the owner of Negative G, good friend of mine. And every time I would go to his house, he'd be like, hey, these are my drift cars. And I'd be like, I'm like, the seed was in there, and I kept like thinking about it. So I was like researching chassis and gyros. I was talking to Jess about gyros. And he's like, oh yeah, you got to get a Futaba gyro. Those are the best. Like if you get a cheap gyro, they just won't work. You'll have speed wobbles and da-da-da-da. And he was just kind of like echoing what other people say in the community. And I knew, based on what I know about gyros and drones, I knew that that couldn't be true. Like it didn't make any sense. Because gyros they're pretty simple. They read an input, and they spit out a correction. It's like they're pretty basic. So for my first gyro, I ordered an AGFRC V3 from HeliDirect. That's not the same gyro that you can get on Amazon. That's the V1. I don't know how well that works. I'm guessing it probably works okay. And for some reason, these V3s, they sold, like I think I got the last one in the States because you can't find them anymore. They'll probably restock after Chinese New Year. But this gyro was like $35, and it works amazing. I initially had first put it in my FXX, and it just worked amazing. And you know, when I built that car and I told Jess about it, he was like pretty skeptical until we started meeting up and driving his other cars, and then he like started to kind of understand, you know, what I was talking about. And then when I built my second car, this RMX, I initially put a Futaba GYD 470 in it because it was like new at the time. So I assumed it would be pretty good, and it was a little bit cheaper at I think like $90. But I found out that I don't really care for the way that Futaba gyros drive, and I'll kind of go into that more later. So I sent that one back, and then I ordered the MST MGX because after reading the specs, I kind of figured that this gyro is actually just an AGFRC V3 because the specs are identical. Like if you fold the instructions out side by side, it's like the same font, print, color. It's like they're made in the same factory. And the reason why I felt pretty comfortable using AGFRC is because if you don't know, AGFRC is like the largest manufacturer of servos, period. Like chances are if you buy a servo, it's made by AGFRC. So like the Rev D RSST, it's got the same programmer as AGF. And I think someone even said that they took one apart and the circuit board actually has AGF printed on it. The Yokomo drift servo, I forgot what it's called, but the case is like identical to an AGFRC servo. So like, and don't get me wrong, they're good servos, but whenever I can, I just buy AGFRC branded because it's cheaper, because it's OEM. When I initially set up the RMX, it did have a lot of speed wobbles. When you are tuning your gyro and tuning your car and you're trying to get rid of speed wobbles, there's a few things that go into it. It's not that the gyro is bad, it's just that you have to make all the pieces fit together. And so with my RMX, I had to adjust my steering linkage to make sure that it was centered with like zero trim. So that involved like actually adjusting the length of the steering linkage. And then I had to install the shorter servo horn that came in the kit. And so what that's doing is it's making it so that the steering has more leverage over the servo, which makes the servo less twitchy. So when the gyro is issuing its corrections, it can't overcorrect because the servo has to fight the physical force of the steering linkage. So if the steering doesn't have that leverage over the servo, that's when it can induce wobbles because it's like it's loose, if that makes sense. And then the other thing I had to do is I had to go into the servo. That's an AGFRC 19 kg servo. And I had to go in and turn the damping up to about 400. And again, that kind of just dulls the sensitivity of the servo. And once I did that, I was able to turn the gyro in the RMX up to 100 gain. And so like, you know, when I tune a drift car, like the gyro has to go up to 100. If it doesn't go up to 100, that tells me something's wrong with the setup of the steering or the settings in the servo. As far as which gyro to buy, I'm like at this point, like I said, they're all really cheap to manufacture. So I'm sure they all have the potential to work up to 100% gain and work really well. It's just going to come down to, you know, the complete package of how everything works together. Right now, if I had to buy another servo, I would probably just get another MST MGX because again, that's made by AGF and it's one of the cheaper servos at about $67. If I could get more AGFRC V3s, I would just stock up on those because they're $35 and it's the same thing and they work great. Some caveats are some of the older gyros like the Yokomo V4, it won't those won't work with the faster Sanwa protocols, but the MST MGX does, which is why I like it. Because, you know, this is my radio and I want the gyro to work with my radio. The Yokomo V4s are good. I've tuned a couple of those now. They drive fine. They feel similar to the AGF-RC servos. The Yokomo V4, I think it's probably made by AGF too. You know, given that AGF makes their servos, it's not a stretch to say that, you know, they don't also make their gyros. Now, going back to Futaba gyros, like those are really popular. But the reason I don't like Futaba gyros is because they're doing more than just counter steering. Futaba's programming also affects the steering responsiveness. Like it slows it down. And that's probably to help with speed wobble, which is fine, but then you get, you know, slower steering response. Like I would rather tune out my speed wobbles than have my gyro slow down my servo, if that makes sense. Plus, Futaba gyros are expensive when I don't feel like, you know, I need to pay that much for a gyro to have my car drift well. The other thing you need to think about when you're thinking about buying a gyro, like let's say you're upgrading an RTR, or even if you're building a kit, like you're gonna wanna buy or upgrade your servo at the same time. And you basically need a servo that you can program the damping in. So like the Rev D RSST is pretty popular, but you can get the AGF-RC 19 kg for almost $10 less, and it comes with the programmer. So if you buy the Rev D and then you get the programmer, it's like $100. So if you get the AGF 19 kg, you're saving like $30, and it's basically the same servo. The 19 kg, it's that, I mean, I would say that's pretty much like, would be like the go-to servo, unless you want, you know, the servo to be like branded a specific way. So yeah, I won't go too much more in depth. So yeah, if you're shopping for a gyro, make sure you're also getting a programmable servo. And if you're currently fighting speed wobbles, look at the length of your servo horn. And I found all this stuff on like a blog that I'll post in the description. Look at the length of your servo horn. Make sure your steering linkage is like mechanically centered. And then make sure that the gyro is not mounted anywhere where it could pick up like excessive vibes. Like on the FXX chassis, this chassis is unique because the motor's in the front, so there's no vibes anywhere. It's so that's a nice feature. But like on the RMX, if I for some reason had the gyro mounted like back here close to the motor, that would be bad, and it would probably affect the gyro with the vibes coming out of the motor. I typically always mount my gyros with like double-sided 3M tape just to help reduce those vibes. But again, both of these cars can run at 100 gain like all day long with no speed wobbles. One more thing I wanted to touch on. Most gyros have like a dual mode where they counter steer, and they have something called AVCS. And I've seen like a lot of people like on YouTube, they'll get a new gyro, they'll put it into AVCS mode, and then they'll go test it and they'll be like, oh, this gyro sucks. AVCS mode stands for vehicle control stability, which means it's gonna make the car go straight. So I'm not sure why people use that, but if you're using AVCS mode, try turning it off and see if the car feels better or more responsive, because that's like, I'm pretty sure that's like a feature for like drag racing or speed running. You know, it's trying to make the car go straight. So I'm not sure why you would use that in drifting. Okay, yeah, that's gonna wrap this video up, guys. If you have any questions or complaints, or if you think I'm dumb, just let me know in the comments why. If you guys have any ideas for any more content like chassis tuning or tires, or if you want to go more in depth with gyros, yeah, just let me know in the comments. All right, thanks for watching.